Welcome back. You are watching Newscentre. The Finance Ministry appointed Committee on Private Equity and Venture Capital Investments has submitted its report to the government. They have recommended ways to accelerate flow of investments into the startup ecosystem. The report has recommended ways to ease the regulatory burden as well as changes to the direct and indirect tax structure in order to attract more investments. To take this forward, we are now joined by Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman of TVS Capital Funds, Siddarth Pai, Founding Partner and CFO at 314 Capital. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Srinivasan, if I can begin with you right now. The committee has recommended that carried interest should be treated as a capital gain, the fund manager should be considered as a pass-through, and the tax should be imposed at the investor's end. Was this among your key recommendations? How do you feel about this?
Crores of pools to 25 lakh crore, which India needs for its 10 trillion vision. So these are all very good steps. In fact, carried interest is actually capital gains. What we are asking for is only a clarification so assessing officers do not take individual action because of lack of clarity or the presence of ambiguity. So these are all excellent recommendations. The goal is to scale up the industry. GST being levied on profits obviously should not be there. And equally, it's very, very important that many other changes which you asked for hopefully will also come along with this. So these are great ideas. This report is not public, so we're all speculating here, and but it sounds like great speculation.
Right. Siddarth Pai, to get you in at this stage, one of the recommendations was on fund management services provided to foreign investors. Now, after hearing the industry and after widespread consultations over 3 months, the committee has recommended, and this is what we learned from sources, that the foreign investors should not be asked to pay 18% GST on availing service of domestic fund managers. They would want to reduce the regulatory burden for foreign investors. So how would this step be, according to you?
I think that's actually a fantastic recommendation in case it does actually come to fruition right now, Parikshit, because see, most of these funds are actually structured as a tax pass-through entities as of now. So these funds essentially function as a bank account to hold investors' funds, as well as the securities or demat account to hold all the investments that's been made. Essentially, the fund manager is the one that's actually rendering all these services almost to the LP itself. Now, because of that, there is a GST that actually applies on exports. But in case that money is actually pooled in an Indian AIF as of now, the 18% GST would actually end up coming, and there would actually end up being a dead loss. So we've actually seen this sort of we've seen this particular AIF operations fall within the interspecies of Indian regulation as well as intent. So I think hopefully now that the committee has actually made that recommendation and the government actually takes that up, this would actually make Indian AIFs far more competitive. And this will actually ensure that the inroads to Indian equities is no longer going to be through Mauritius, but it will actually be through Mumbai, because all these foreign investors, rather than choosing to pool their money overseas and then to actually come through various structures, can directly pool their money in India in case you want to invest into Indian equities itself. It reduces the inefficiencies that existed in the erstwhile regime and will actually make Indian fund managers and Indian AIFs far more competitive compared to their global counterparts as well.
Right. Mr. Srinivasan, no tax should be applied on foreign investors for availing fund management services. Is this something that you had also asked for?
All of these are our recommendations. Parikshit, actually, as per the GST Act, managing of money is export activity. It is just a matter of the maturity of the regulatory processes that need this clarity to come out. So when we bring in money, we manage it, and then we have a time limit at the expiry of the fund life to export the money back. It is not any different from exporting diamonds for export, is it not? So basically, hopefully this will all come through and more people will pool in the domestic area, AIF structures. This will create also a lot of ecosystem benefits of more fund managers, more accountants, more tax lawyers, and greatly enhance the capability of the ecosystem. Fund management like IBC, which is, and I'm hoping this is going to be an IBC moment for the AIF industry, are basically ecosystem driven. Strong systems, ecosystems create for strong and resilient fund management industry.
Now, Siddarth, there have been very exhaustive recommendations which have been made by the committee to reduce the regulatory friction when it comes to investments by PE and venture capital investors. At the same time, make sure that there is a domestic pool of capital available to startups in a volatile environment, because they do need investments. They do need capital for their growth plans. How much of this do you think can come in the budget, according to you?
So I'm hoping, Parikshit, that a large amount of this does come in the budget itself. In terms of capital support, also Indian capital or rupee capital roughly makes up 15% of the overall money that Indian startups have actually raised. So in the year 2021, when they actually raised about $44 billion, only 15% of that actually came from Indian sources. And the consequence of that are actually seen in the year 2022, when the entire world was actually burning for that matter. Inflation was rising. There was a war between Russia and Ukraine. We've actually seen startup funding take a massive hit and actually severely depreciated. Now, the rest of the world hasn't, the other startup ecosystems of the world, be it China or US, haven't suffered as much because they have exceptionally large pools of local domestic capital that can actually support their startups itself. And the Indian government, kudos to them, actually did the SIDBI Fund of Funds. The 10,000 crore fund of funds has actually been created, that was created, I think, in the year 2016. That's actually helped seed a number of fund managers in the country itself. But 10,000 crores, about $1.5 billion, isn't actually large enough. We actually need multiple other supports at this systems to actually come in. I think the bigger point that we had also raised through IBCA as well as others with the Damodaran committee is to actually remove the shackles on Indian institutional capital from actually investing into it. Whereas we haven't seen LIC actually invest into startups to a large extent. We haven't seen the PFRDA or SBI or a larger Indian institutions take direct stakes in startups. There are numerous regulatory frictions that actually prevent them from doing so. So as part of our entire effort to actually increase the rupee capital base, we have actually made these recommendations. Some of these are policy-based recommendations. Others actually require capital support. So I think if the policy ones can also end up coming up in this budget right about now, the large pools of domestic capital that's actually waiting on the sidelines, that's eager and wants to participate in this particular asset class but can't, purely due to regulation, can finally be unleashed, and India can have a strong enough bulwark of rupee capital to end up participating in the startup success story that we're seeing right now.
All right. Okay, we've run out of time, but Siddarth Pai and Gopal Srinivasan, thank you very much for joining us here on Newscentre, and news and updates continue on the other side.